Greek philosophers, who rejected the immortality of the soul. Groups like Jehovah's Witnesses and Christadelphians often claim that Christianity was influenced by Greek philosophy during the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. They argue that Greek philosophy introduced the idea of the immortality of the soul into Christian theology. While it is true that some Greek philosophers, such as Plato, taught the immortality of the soul, a view that contradicts biblical teachings, the claim that all Greek philosophy endorsed this idea is incorrect. In reality, Greek philosophical thought was diverse. Many Greek philosophers rejected the notion of an immortal soul and instead embraced materialist views, teaching that the soul was a physical entity that ceased to exist upon death. Furthermore, Greek philosophy had already influenced certain Jewish writings long before Christianity. This can be seen in texts like 4 Maccabees, the Wisdom of Solomon, and the works of Philo of Alexandria. The real issue is not simply Greek philosophy as a whole, but rather which Greek philosophical ideas influenced Christian theology. While the Platonic view of an immortal soul became dominant in later Christian thought, it was not the only perspective available. Democritus and the material soul. Democritus, an early Greek philosopher and one of the founders of atomism, believed that everything in the universe was composed of tiny indivisible particles called atoms. This included the soul, psuchê, which he saw as consisting of particularly fine, smooth, and round atoms, similar to fire. According to Democritus, these soul atoms were more active and mobile than the atoms that made up the body. Materialism and the soul. Democritus rejected supernatural explanations for the soul. Instead, he argued that the soul was entirely material and functioned as part of the natural world. The soul atoms were responsible for motion, thought, and sensation. They interacted with the body's heavier atoms to generate life and perception. Death and the dissolution of the soul. Since the soul was made of atoms, it could not exist apart from the body. At death, the fine atoms of the soul dispersed and scattered, causing the complete cessation of consciousness. This idea was later expanded upon by the Epicureans, who argued that the fear of death was irrational because death simply meant non-existence. Epicurus, death is nothing to us. Epicurus, who lived in the 4th century BCE, was heavily influenced by Democritus, but made several refinements to atomist thought. He argued that the soul was not a divine or immortal entity, but rather a material structure composed of extremely fine atoms. The soul is made of atoms. Like Democritus, Epicurus taught that the soul consisted of atoms, but he identified them as even finer and more mobile than ordinary matter. He compared the soul's composition to a combination of breath and heat, thermae, suggesting that it was a subtle but entirely physical substance. The soul is mortal. Epicurus rejected the idea that the soul could exist apart from the body. When a person dies, the soul atoms disperse, leading to the end of consciousness. Since the soul and body are inseparably linked, there is no afterlife, no punishment, and no continued existence. Death should not be feared. One of Epicurus's most famous teachings was the tetrapharmakos, or 4-part remedy, which helped his followers achieve peace of mind, ataraxia. One of these principles stated, "Death is nothing to us. When we exist, death is not. When death exists, we are not." This means that death is a state of non-existence, and since we will never experience it, there is no reason to fear it. The soul and perception. Epicurus argued that the soul was responsible for sensation, aesthesis, and thought. The most refined part of the soul, responsible for reasoning and emotions, was located in the chest, to hegemonikon. The rest of the soul, spread throughout the body, controlled basic functions such as movement and perception. Other philosophers who rejected an immortal soul. Epicurus was not alone in his materialist view of the soul. Several other Greek and Roman thinkers rejected the idea of an immortal, supernatural soul. 1. Lucretius, 9955 BCE, Roman Epicurean. Lucretius, a follower of Epicurus, wrote De Rerum Natura, in which he expanded on the idea that the soul was composed of fine, fast-moving atoms. He argued that when a person dies, the soul atoms disperse into the environment, making consciousness impossible after death. 2. Anaxagoras, 500 to 428 BCE, pre-Socratic philosopher. Anaxagoras proposed that nous, mind or soul, was a fine material substance that organized the universe. While his ideas were not explicitly atomic, he suggested that thought and consciousness were tied to physical processes. 3. Stoics, 3rd century BCE onward. The Stoics believed that the soul was a kind of pneuma, breath-like force, composed of fire and air. Although some Stoics thought the soul might persist for a time after death, they did not argue for its immortality in a Platonic sense. 4. Strato of Lampsacus, 335 to 269 BCE. Aristotelian materialist. Strato, a successor of Aristotle, argued that the soul was a physical phenomenon governed by the movement of fine particles. He rejected supernatural explanations and believed that consciousness ceased upon death. 5. Thomas Hobbes, 1588 to 1679 CE, early modern materialist. Although not an ancient philosopher, Hobbes continued the tradition of materialist thought by arguing that the soul was simply the physical functions of the body. He denied any supernatural existence of the soul and viewed human cognition as purely mechanical. Biblical support for a mortal soul. Interestingly, the Bible aligns more with the materialist view of the soul than with Plato's belief in an immortal separable soul. In Ezekiel 18:4, God declares, "The soul that sins shall die." This statement directly contradicts the idea of an immortal soul that continues to exist after death. Instead, it supports the notion that the soul is tied to the body and ceases to exist upon death, similar to the views held by Democritus, Epicurus, and other Greek materialists. Conclusion. The claim that Greek philosophy universally promoted the immortality of the soul is incorrect. While Plato's view became dominant in later Christian theology, several Greek philosophers, such as Democritus, Epicurus, and Lucretius, rejected the notion of an immortal soul. These thinkers believed that the soul was a material substance that perished with the body, a perspective that aligns more closely with biblical teachings than with later Platonic or Christian dualism. Thus, the debate over the soul's nature was not a simple matter of Greek philosophy versus biblical thought, but rather a question of which Greek philosophical traditions influenced Christianity.